two triangles. So the triangle going down, that's the future, and triangle going up is the past. And that's actually fitting the picture. Now, 10 years ago, nobody would have said this. Because 10 years ago, we didn't have the information. This is pretty new. Okay. And, oh, here's Teilhard de Chardin, his make a point. He's, eventually maybe when the Vatican, they have this astronomy thing, but they have a bunch of jerks going there. I mean, not saying anything. So eventually maybe they'll realize that, because Teilhard de Chardin is still kind of excommunicated. So I mean, he's kind of, they excommunicated this guy at one point.
It hasn't reached them yet. They're farther.
It hasn't reached them yet. And but oh, and then there was this is kind of interesting. And look at this. Okay, there's this guy when Fred Allen Wolfe and I and a guy named Bob Tobin in 1973 were on these strange adventures in Europe, and we introduced this 84-year-old man, Carlos Suarez. This back, yeah, and he was this Kabbalist, and he lived in this apartment on the Champ de Mars, right by the Eiffel Tower. This close to he was Sartre. He's part of Jean-Paul Sartre and Anis Nin, and all that. He was part of that whole thing in the 20s and the 30s. But in any case, we for some very strange coincidence, we got to know him, and Fred Wolfe and I were in our 30s, and so we would go to his house, and he was like giving us Hebrew lessons, Kabbalah. He started to teach us the Kabbalah. He's a Kabbalist, and and he would say things, and Frank sort of was more interested. I was, not that interested in it, but he said one of the things you would do. He says you're going to smash the wall of light. He's looking for the physicists. He says, the Genesis in the Bible, the Old Testament, is really a code for the creation of the universe. That it's like the Rosetta Stone, and the physicists are going to have to decode it. It says theologians, they don't know anything. Flops, they don't, But he wanted to meet physicists. He had met David Bohm, and then he would meet Fred, and Fred and I was pretty crazy. He was smoking grass back in Paris, and he was like 1973, and having a great time. And and at one point one day I'm up there, and I'm sort of like dozing off, not paying attention. It's like, and he was a little bit. It's like Yoda in Star Wars. He's like Yoda. Really, I mean, he even looked at it like a little, it's sort of like Maurice. And he grabs me by the shoulders, and he looks at me, and he says, "You don't know it yet. You don't know it. You will not come into your power until you're with the woman and the child." And
you're still contemplating that one.
No, that's Tina and Andrew.
Yeah.
Tina and Andrew. She's Sephardic too. So now it turns out, he was very close to Lawrence Durrell, and he is, if you read the Alexandria Quartet, he is the character Balthazar is partly based on. The books is Justine, Cleo. What are the Balthazar?
Mount Olive.
And Mount Olive. Okay. So the character. Now it turns out all these guys were spies in World War II. See, if you read, they were all. Lawrence Durrell was in the British intelligence. Was like the equivalent of MI6, right? It was British. And Carlos was actually in Paris when the Nazis were there, and for some, he was Jewish, from Alexandria, Egypt. Just like for some reason, So all these guys were all involved in the intelligence in World War II, and then at one point I'm in Cambridge University in 1974 after sort of seeing Carlo, and I'm at this Cambridge University, this meeting of the Psychic Research Society of Cambridge. When I first met Brian Josephson, it was another crazy. He's Nobel Prize physicist into all this kind of weird stuff. And there was a guy there named Dennis Bardens, and Dennis Bardens at that time must have been, I guess, 70 years old, and very distinguished. He's like the official biographer of Winston Churchill, okay? But he's also was he created Panorama, the BBC, and during World, you read about him in Google him, you see he was in Czechoslovakia, and he's British intelligence too, okay? And he looks like M or something from, you know, right out of a James Bond movie, the old guy who's trying. And so we're at this meeting, and he walks up to me and he says, "Dr. Sarfatti, may I take you to dinner?" You know, and he's, you know, very distinguished. He looked like Winston Churchill. You know, I mean that type of, you know, very distinguished older gentleman. And Fred Wolf kind of met him. Fred Wolf said, "Yeah, go with him." So he took me to the Blue Boar Inn in Cambridge, and we had this nice dinner. I remember duck and cherry sauce and, you know, all that stuff. And I still remember the dinner. And then we go to the club, the gentleman's club, right? And it's you know, people smoking and, you know, the wood fire and the mahogany and all this kind of deep leather seats. And we're sitting there, and he pulls out a cigar, and we're having brandy and cigars, and he looks at me and he says, and he winks. He does this little impish, devilish thing. He says, "First of all, Dr. Sarfatti, you should know that I'm a Kabbalist." You know, those secret society stuff, right? You know, I'm a Kabbalist. And he winks, because obviously he knew Durrell and he knew Carlo. I just come, you know, in Paris, right? Then he says, then he gets serious. This is a great scene, because we're going to do a movie, I think. And he says, "Dr. Sarfatti," gets very serious. He says, "My duty to inform you of a psychic war raging across the continents between the Soviet Union and your country, and you ought to be in the thick of it." This was okay. And that's exactly what happened. Well, it was already happening, of course. See, I didn't know that the Central Intelligence Agency was, you know, they're the ones who were paying for my trip and everything. I mean, they were, you know, SRI. I didn't, you know, we were academics. Fred and I were, you know, they don't tell you these things, you know. But this is all, I found out later, of course, you know. And then soon after I met Werner Erhard. I don't know if any of you all remember Werner Erhard. And there was all kinds of adventures and stuff like that. But all, you know, all been going on.
Consciousness, just
consciousness. Okay, so consciousness. Okay. Okay, what quantum mechanics does not allow.
Much more interesting than the nature of consciousness.
Okay, all right. Okay, there's a model. David Bohm, this guy David Bohm, who I worked with at the University of London in the 70s, and he was, you know, he had worked with Einstein actually, and with Oppenheimer at Berkeley, and then he left the country because he covered up. He actually took the fall. Oppenheimer was a communist, and I guess David was a communist too, and there was some deal. I mean, he took the fall. He kind of protected Oppenheimer and said, no, so he escaped. Actually, Einstein helped Bohm leave Princeton to go to Brazil. On a boat, on a freighter. Okay. And then actually Richard Feynman, but there's a whole, you know, interesting story. But in any case, Bohm wound up, he was in Israel for a while, then he wound up a professor at the University of London. Okay, and Bohm, he got into consciousness, his implicate order. He hung up Krishnamurti and a bunch of, you know, visionaries, the artists and stuff like that. So, excuse me, very smart guy. And he has this theory of quantum mechanics, in which basically, I'm going to simplify it, it's what's called the quantum potential. Basically, it's a mental information field, okay? And you have matter, what are called the hidden variables. And what happens is, in quantum theory, this quantum potential, think of it as a mind field, if you want, like a physical mind field. Mind, and not M-I-N-E, but M-I-N-D, like a mental field in a certain sense. And what it does, it influences the motion of material particles, okay? In addition to forces. So it's like a quantum force. It's not really, it has very strange, all the quantum weirdness, all this stuff that's weird about quantum mechanics is in these non-local properties of the quantum potential, and also what's called context dependent. If you read a book called The Undivided Universe by David Bohm and Basil Hiley, well, that's a technical book. You can get it, you know, that's, if you know some basic physics, you can get the details there. But there's some popular books he writes about the implicate order, I forget what it's called, quantum implications. There are some popular works. And he has some books with Krishnamurti even, I think, dialogues with Krishnamurti. So, okay, so the point is this, it's like you have action without reaction. In other words, this mental field controls the motion of particles, but it does it in a random way. It's called uncontrollable quantum randomness. And that leads to things like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. Because there's no direct feedback, no what's called back reaction of the particles back on their quantum potential. So it's like you have action of mind on matter without any reaction of matter back on mind.